Welcome back, my friends, to Immigration Law Made Easy. This is going to be the Trump proposal edition. So let's talk a little bit about what we see with President Trump and kind of the different things that he's saying he's going to do from an incoming policy perspective and what his initiatives are. So you can kind of see what the idea is and what the reality of that might be is. And that's what we're going to cover in this podcast today. Of course, I want to start this by saying that I don't have a crystal ball. Only time will tell how things will actually play out. I will also say that I was really surprised at the vast amount of people who voted for Donald Trump. So sometimes I think, wow, maybe I live in a little bit of an echo chamber because I had no idea this many people were willing to vote for this type of person, and yet here we are. So let's start with just general constitutional implications. I want to talk about each of his different plans, from birthright citizenship to expedited removals to what it's going to look like if the military is involved in enforcing resources, and kind of what our relationship with Mexico is going to look like going forward. And so those will be kind of the main topics that we cover in today's podcast. And if you have questions or concerns, please reach out to me at New Frontier Immigration Law. You are always welcome to come to my Facebook Lives. I do those every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Arizona. And then I also go live a lot on Instagram as well. Usually I try to double stream. So if you have questions and really want to be involved in this conversation in real time, I invite you to do that. All right, let's get started with constitutional implications. So one of the things that Donald Trump, that President-elect Trump, is proposing to do is to change birthright citizenship. And that is a pretty unlikely thing to happen. And that's because it requires changing the 14th Amendment. Our right to birthright citizenship is a constitutional right. It's not a state right. It's not a federal law. It's like the ultimate guiding force for our entire country. And that's in the Constitution. So the idea of amending that, although I wish that it was more far-fetched and really out there than it would normally seem that way. But the reality is that with any change that is on the horizon, we have a majority of the Senate and the House are both going to be Republican-led. We have a majority of the U.S. Supreme Court is with Supreme Court justices who are from a conservative branch. Like, they're all coming from a lot of Trump nominations. And so we don't have a lot of Obama nominations really left on the bench in terms of a majority. And so that means it's going to be a lot easier to push forward major changes. That said, we have to remember that the Constitution is amended so rarely, and it's so difficult to amend the Constitution for this reason. It's not only because it takes so many different people to amend the Constitution, like everybody's got to be on board with it, but the constitutionality has to be legal. So let's pretend that all of, that the Senate and the House both agree to change the Constitution and say that if you're not legally here, your child who's born here doesn't get status. And that's really what Trump is proposing. He's saying that if you are undocumented, then your child who's born here doesn't automatically get citizenship. Instead, only children who are born to folks who are documented, who have residency, or who have citizenship, can pass their citizenship on, essentially, which really kind of ends birthright citizenship and creates what's called derivative citizenship, where you're born in the USA, but you also have to derive citizenship somehow from your parent. Let's pretend that constitutional amendment goes into effect. What happens next? Well, there's a principle called retroactivity in the law. And that means that the principle is ordinarily the law does not go back in time and retroactively impact people. So, and that's something that Trump has alluded to, even as he's described wanting to end birthright citizenship, It's that it won't reach back in time and change people's status, that you can't go back in time and say, you were a citizen, birthright citizen then, but you're not a birthright citizen now because we've retroactively changed. We changed the Constitution, and we're going to make this change go back in time to what was then a law, now undoes it. That's just not going to work. It's not going to happen, and it would really, it's just not going to happen. So I feel really, really confident, like a 99% confidence, even if this really unlikely constitutional change happens, I think that it's almost impossible for it to go back in time and apply to people in the past. So if you were born in the US and your parent or parents were here without permission, they were not US citizens or they were not lawful permanent residents, and maybe they were here with permission. Maybe your mom had you when she was here on a tourist visa. You would still, under Trump's proposal, not be a U.S. citizen. But if that happened in the past and you're listening and you're like, I'm a U.S. citizen, is this going to change my citizenship? I would say the answer is almost certainly no, like a 99% certainty of no. It's not, no one's going to take away your citizenship, but it could impact people going forward if they can get this. There's just I guess what I'm trying to underscore is there are so many hurdles to be able to, before we can actually get Trump's plan in place. Biden hasn't been able to, just for context, Biden hasn't been able to get anything done related to immigration at all in his entire 4 years that he was president because everything got tied up in litigation. So I assume and believe that the same trend will be true. Even when Trump was president before, a lot of what he tried to do got tied up in litigation and was later found to be illegal. So I think that the idea that our birthright citizenship is going to change is relatively low, but even if it does, it's not going to reach back in time. The other piece is, from an international law perspective, if you are born here in the United States, there's a principle in the law called statelessness. And it's basically where no country will claim you. This is what this principle means. It's like no country will claim you, and so you can't be deported to anywhere because no country will claim you. And so if Trump does this, let's say this constitutional challenge, like this constitutional change works, and then we have so many people every single year who are born here to undocumented parents. If you can't prove in Mexico or wherever your parents are from, if that country won't give you status, won't give you citizenship, then this constitutional change would make you stateless. And there's a huge problem with statelessness because we really disfavor that as a community, as an international global community. We want people to have status in their country, their home country, or whatever country they were born in ordinarily. So this would be really, really disfavored because on top of that, if you were born here and you can't prove that you're a citizen somewhere else, the United States would not be able to deport you. And so it doesn't really make sense. We're creating even a greater problem with people being undocumented rather than getting people on the path to citizenship. Obviously, they would already be on a path to citizenship. If they were born here under our current laws, they would already be a citizen. So all these things together, between the matter of statelessness, between the idea of there's no retroactivity in the law, or that's usually very disfavored as well, and then just the challenges to actually amending the Constitution, where it's nearly impossible to amend the Constitution. I think that all in all, the probability of birthright citizenship actually ending in the United States is very low. I think it's a really good talking point for Trump, and people get really fired up about it, and they don't think through what the second and third order effects are going to be. And that's why his base is like, yeah, you know what? That's right. We should end that. We shouldn't allow people to be able to do that. When in reality, I just don't think that it's going to happen. So we'll see. Only time will tell. But for now, that is kind of where we'll go from here. Next is a question of, can we use the military to enforce domestic laws? So military forces are really only supposed to be used in the United States under the Constitution, in the United States when we're at war, when it's wartime. And that's why Trump is trying to cite this Enemy Insurrection Act, where we're at war with a foreign country and we have those people here in the United States, they're citizens here in the United States who we're trying to remove. Think World War II, when we were afraid and we actually did horrible things to the Japanese U.S. citizens, Japanese Americans, by putting them in internment camps. And these are the types of things that when we are at war with a foreign country and we think that they have those citizens who are going to do bad things to us here, that's why we can use the military inside the United States. Let's go way back to why this constitutional issue exists to begin with. We do not want willy-nilly military members being able to walk around inside the United States, because not only does it create a police state, but it creates the environment of a civil war. And I believe it was in 1875, so 10 years after the Civil War ended, that we saw this Insurrection Act created. So we went to war again. So in any event, the likelihood of the military being able to be used to enforce domestic law is very, very low. The exception to this is the National Guard, because the National Guard, in Mexico, the National Guard is very similar to the police. Here in the United States, the National Guard is absolutely a part of the military. So it's just state funded instead of completely federally funded is my basic understanding of it. And the reality is that you cannot just go in as a National Guards person and start enforcing the laws of the land without the governor instructing you to do so. So in states that are very, very red, very Trump-friendly states like Texas or Florida, for example, I think we could actually see the National Guard be used at the border in particular, and potentially in helping ICE. I would be really surprised. I think that there would be a lot of people who could say they are a conscientious objector and refuse to follow these orders because it is potentially against their morals to deport people. And it's definitely not what they signed up for when they signed up to join the National Guard and protect the United States' interests against foreign enemies. But in any event, I think that the likelihood of the National Guard being used in very, very red states is likely. In blue states, at least with blue governors, like Arizona right now has a Democratic governor who specifically stated that the National Guard is not going to be used. In California, the same thing. The concern that I have is what happens if the Texas governor orders the Texas National Guard to come enforce the border in Arizona. This could be a really big problem, and I really don't know how that plays out. But in my mind, it could play out with the National Guard of Texas pointing guns at the National Guard of Arizona. And those are the makings of civil war, which is exactly why we don't want the military enforcing domestic laws, because we start getting very fractioned and it throws back to Civil War vibes, and we don't want that. Okay, so let's hope that that doesn't happen. And I think the likelihood of it happening is relatively low. I think that the Texas governor would be crazy to send the Texas National Guard into Arizona to enforce the border here. There are so many things in these, that's what I keep having to tell myself, to be honest. It's there are so many things that you have to, that have to go wrong in order for the thing that I worry the most about to actually happen. And so I have to tell myself, the probability of step one is relatively low. The probability of step two is even lower. And the more steps we go out to get to the bad thing, that is the National Guards of Texas and Arizona pointing guns at each other, a lot of things have to happen to get there, which means that although it is possible, it is not probable. And so I have to keep telling myself that. And I hope that that gives you some peace of mind, because it is a bit of a wild time. All right, next up, let's talk about the due process concerns regarding expedited deportations, basically like Trump's mass deportation plan. So from what I can tell, and I will be very, very honest with you, only time will tell what Trump is actually going to do. Anytime someone is leaking an immigration enforcement plan and leaking those sorts of things, I think it's because they are trying to create press and media around things. Trump loves to be in control of the media and to create a lot of chaos. And by leaking different things ahead of time, it starts to put people immediately into fear mode. And the reality is it's going to signal to people that something bad is coming. and they will start to leave themselves. So that is my concern for folks who have the possibility of getting, like, let's say a T visa here. If you have the possibility of getting a T visa, which means you were a human trafficking victim in the United States, and you hear that Trump is going to go around and deport all these people, and you're like, F it, I'm out of here. I'm not going to have my kids come home to an empty house after school one day because I got rounded up in an ICE raid and deported to Mexico. I'm taking my kids with me to Mexico. Well, what that means is that once you leave, you no longer have access to status in the US through a T visa, because you have to apply for a T visa inside the United States. And so that's a problem. So if you are thinking, I'm not going to stick around for this, please at least call and talk to a lawyer beforehand and figure out, do I have any options? And if the answer is no, then you might be making a good decision to just say, I pack up, I leave, I'm not going to stay for this stress. So I kind of share that anecdotally because what Trump is going to do initially, from what I'm seeing of his plans, is he's going to go back to what he did previously. So previously, when he took office, the existing policy for deporting people who had already been ordered removed, these are folks who've already been through the removal process, they already went to court, and the court told them, you are going to be ordered removed, watch the mail, we're going to send you a letter for when you need to leave the country, or you need to leave the country by such and such date, whichever comes sooner. People have been checking in with their deportation officers, and because they're not a priority for removal, like, we have only so many resources in the United States. We only have so many tax dollars that we can throw at putting people on buses, putting people on planes, apprehending them in addition, and then taking them to their home country. It is relatively simple to deport to Canada and Mexico, right? Like, we have tons of undocumented immigrants in the United States from Canada. We always hear about undocumented immigrants from Mexico, but there are lots and lots of people who are undocumented from Canada as well. We can deport to both directions. On a bus, it's relatively easy to load folks on a bus and deport them. The issue is, what do we do when we need to deport people to Honduras or El Salvador or Guatemala or Argentina or Brazil, or let's go all the way to Australia? What about all the way to China or Bangladesh or you name it, like all these countries in Africa? It's very, very expensive because the US pays for their deportation. The individual does not buy their own plane ticket. Okay? So when we think about how many resources do we have? We contract, the United States government contracts with different airlines, and they even have their own like airplanes, from my understanding, that they fill up, and they can, when they fill up the plane, they can deport the whole plane, all these folks, to Cuba. But they have to organize that and then bring all these people, apprehend all of them, make sure that they come on time, make sure none of them, at the time when Trump was president last time, make sure none of them had COVID, so you're not sticking all these people on a plane, giving everybody COVID, and then releasing them into the next country. So there was a quarantine period for everyone. Like, there's a ton that goes into deporting people. And there's a lot of money to be made for these organizations that are helping as contractors to deport people. So when we think about all the resources that go into this, who is our number one priority? Right now, under the Biden administration, and similarly under the Obama administration, the number one priority for removal were people who had, number one, already been ordered removed, and number two, had significant criminal history. We want to get these folks out of our country, is what what ICE is saying. We want to get these folks out of our country, and they are the priority. We're going to throw all of our resources at deporting those people. And that has been the policy throughout the Obama era and throughout Biden's administration. Trump, however, says anybody and everybody is a priority. This is exactly what he did last time, and this is the same thing he's going to do again this time. Anybody and everybody is a priority. But they're going to start with folks who are in jail, because they're so much easier to apprehend. They're already in jail, and they take them right to ICE, and then they begin the removal process. And then folks who already have deportation orders, so we don't need to put them back through court. So what that tells me, and that should tell you, are that people who are already in jail and you don't have status here, or maybe you had DACA, but now you're going to lose DACA because you have this criminal history, this criminal conviction that you're in jail for, or if you've already been removed, you are going to be the easiest people, the easiest target to go deport because there are less obstacles in the way in terms of being able to go back to court or be able to fight for your right to stay. You are going to be the first target, that those people are going to be the first target for removals. The families, the new air quote border czar, he worked with Trump previously. He's suggesting that entire families, including children who are U.S. citizens, will have the option to be deported with their parents, that the United States will essentially deport the whole family, but it wouldn't be deporting a U.S. citizen because the U.S. citizen would be choosing to stay with their family versus choosing to stay in the United States and potentially be put into foster care. So there are a lot remains to be seen, and I think that again, what will really happen will be the exact same thing that happened last time, which is that everybody will be a priority. And so if you don't have a case pending, you really should talk to a lawyer, because if you have a case pending, then those types of things will historically, even during the Trump administration, help protect you from removal until your case kind of like runs its course. And so having a case pending is not complete protection, but it is a good shelter. I would call it a good shelter. Next is, I would love to talk to you about the economic impact of Trump's deportation plans. Not only are they going to reduce the number of green cards that are given, and this includes overall, like the visas and green cards that are given to extraordinary workers. So all of these folks who work for Elon Musk, who were, working for Twitter. Like, I don't know if you guys remember when Twitter was purchased and became X, and then Elon Musk laid off a whole bunch of people. He didn't lay off the H-1B workers. Instead, those H-1B workers were like literally sleeping in their offices because they were working so much and afraid to lose their job. And the reason for this is because as an H-1B worker, if you lose your job, you only have a certain amount of time to find a new employer, or you have to leave the country. And so your ability to live in the United States, where perhaps your kid is going to school and you've purchased a home and like you've really built a life here because you expected to be able to work for Twitter for the next 5 years or whatever, your whole ability to stay in the United States is tied to this job. Now, if we limit the number of those visas that are available, which is part of what Trump is proposing, all of these tech companies are not going to have access to all of these foreign workers. We already in the United States don't have enough humans to fill the number of jobs that we have. In my company alone, we have so many job ads out and very, very few people applying for them who are qualified applicants, which is why I recruit a ton in foreign countries, because there are a lot of bilingual, ready to work, trained people in lots of foreign countries. So the economic impact alone on the United States, from an economics perspective, when you have more jobs and not enough people, your economy collapses. This is because you can't grow, and so lots of businesses will shut down. My business, let's use my business as an example. If I have lots and lots of people, like I do right now, who contact my firm and ask me to help them with their immigration services, and I say, yes, I can help you. I want to help you. But if I don't have enough people working for me, or who are available to work for me, to be able to actually do the work, my business, although I have the solution to the problem, my business can't grow. And if I'm really strapped for people, if I really can't find people, because now my business can't grow, and so now I can't advertise more to then make payroll, my business will collapse because I have too many job vacancies. It doesn't matter how good the solution is to my problem, I can't deliver the service that people would hire me for. And so that's how economies collapse. When you have lots of people who want to buy, but nobody to do the work, the cost of the goods becomes so very expensive. And I think we're going to start to see that. Groceries are already very expensive compared to what I grew up with as a kid, for sure. But when you think about me growing up in the 80s and the 90s, we had lots of farm worker visa programs, and we let people come into the country we didn't even regard it as coming in illegally. We just let people come into the country and work and leave. We had a much more open border policy in the 80s and 90s than we do now. And that's why in the 80s and 90s, we even granted amnesty to lots of people because we recognized that we needed those people here in order for our economy to survive. This was an economic decision to grant amnesty. It wasn't just we feel good and Reagan loved people. No, Reagan was a Republican. He saw that there was an economic benefit to providing security for people who had come here and stayed for a certain amount of time in the 80s. It was in 1988. And many of those people were Mexicans who had initially come to the United States to do some of the jobs that then and now we cannot fill. You go to California and you look at all the folks who are picking all of your vegetables. You look in Florida, all the people who are picking all your fruits and vegetables. And many of those folks are people who've come into the country to work, and they're doing jobs that we haven't been able to fill here in the United States. So if push comes to shove, we're going to start to have Americans do those jobs, or the cost of fruits and vegetables are going to be so high that we're going to be begging people to come back. So I want to kind of end on international relations. So when we talk about deporting lots of people, including many people to Central America and South America, the reality is Mexico is not going to let the United States drive through Mexico to deport people. They're not going to allow people to get dropped off at their border. The president of Mexico has already said just that. They're saying, if you are Mexican and you're getting deported to Mexico, we welcome you back. And we are honored to have you return because you were always once a Mexican, always a Mexican. But for everybody else, the president has said, we're not taking you. The United States is going to need to deport you to your own country. And that again goes back to the cost of deporting people in mass is very, very high. I don't know how we're going to afford it, folks. It remains to be seen. So for now, that's what I want to end on. And what I want to say is that Mexico has always been an amazing trade partner for us. Mexico has always been an amazing neighbor for us. President Trump talks very negatively oftentimes about Mexicans. And I think that too often Americans are willing to buy into that racist narrative. But the reality is a very, very different picture. If you want to do any additional reading, I would encourage you to read an excellent book. I do recommend reading it, not listening to it, because I've tried to listen to it and I get a little sleepy. But reading an excellent book called Accidental Superpower. And the premise of this book is that if the United States can, basically the world order is going to collapse, is the premise of this book. Because the United States is going to withdraw the Navy's constant policing of the oceans. Right now, our U.S. Navy is the police of all international waters, which ensures that pirates, literal pirates, don't hijack all of these goods that are being traded. The Navy is the police of the water. This book argues that the Navy is going to withdraw that, and that the United States is going to stop with a lot of its international trade and is going to turn inward. But when we look at birth rates, China has a negative birth rate. There are not enough people in China being born to be able to support their economy and be able to do the jobs that need to be done. That's why China is so on the cutting edge of using robots and AI and automations to be able to do jobs that ordinarily would be given to humans, because we don't have enough humans to do these jobs. We have to figure this out, or our entire country is going to collapse. The United States also has a negative, an inverse birth rate. The way the United States, this book argues, the way the United States stays on top of things and stays a superpower is because of immigration. Because people are always from all the way up, from Argentina all the way up to Central America and throughout Mexico, people still want to come to the United States and live and work. And we don't have to pay to educate the people who are coming. They're 18, 19, 20 years old. They're entry-level workers for the most part. This is, again, what the book is arguing. It helps save the United States and help it retain its status as a superpower. Those young people, we didn't have to pay to put them through education through K through 12, which is like $100,000 or more If I can't remember the exact number, but it's 6 figures to educate one kid through K through 12. We didn't have to pay that investment for that child. And now we have a ready and willing to work worker who can fill entry level positions. The United States will therefore be able to support itself through no longer having international trade partners. So when we think about, let's go a few steps into the future. And again, just like I talked about at the beginning, many things have to happen in order for this outcome to be necessary. But if we just look at birth rates alone, the United States doesn't have enough babies in the United States being born. We need immigrants to come to the United States to keep our country alive and well and economically healthy. So I end there. I hope that you will share this with a friend who's curious about what Trump policies mean from a mostly objective perspective. I am absolutely not objective because I love immigration and I believe that it's what makes our country so great, and from a superpower perspective and from an economics perspective and also from a humanitarian perspective. But I've given you my most objective points as possible. I hope that you have a great day and that you live in peace, that fear is not from God, it is from something else, and that maybe you've learned something today that gave you a little more peace for tomorrow. See ya!